In 1965, an astronaut smuggled a corned beef sandwich into orbit, and it nearly triggered a congressional hearing. That story is number 2. But here is what nobody tells you. The men who raced to the moon ate things that would make you push away from the table. Number 8 was so foul, an astronaut cursed it on a live microphone heard around the world. And number 1 was never on NASA's menu, yet it became the first food eaten on another world. Hit subscribe. Let us count down. Let us count down the 25 strangest foods Apollo astronauts actually ate on the road to the moon. Number 25. Applesauce squeezed from an aluminum tube. This is where it all started, and it started ugly. In February 1962, John Glenn climbed into a capsule the size of a phone booth called Friendship 7, and while he was busy becoming the first American to orbit the Earth, he did something no human had ever done in weightlessness. He ate. What he ate was applesauce, and it came out of an aluminum tube that looked exactly like a tube of toothpaste. He unscrewed the cap, stuck the nozzle in his mouth, and squeezed. Nobody knew if a person could even swallow in zero gravity. Doctors genuinely worried the food might not go down, that it might float back up, that the whole act of eating might fail. Glenn proved it worked. The applesauce was bland, warm, and joyless, but it went down, and it stayed down. That squeeze of mush answered a question that had haunted the entire space program. Humans could eat up there. Everything on this list exists because of that first sour, lukewarm mouthful. Number 24. Pureed beef and vegetables in a tube. If applesauce was the polite introduction, the meat tubes were the punishment. Early space food borrowed directly from Army survival rations, and the philosophy was simple. Take a real meal, grind it into a paste, and pack it into a metal tube so it could not float away and gum up the instruments. The result was beef and vegetables reduced to the consistency of baby food, sucked through a straw, tasting of salt and tin. Astronauts could not see the food. They could not smell it. They just squeezed a gray paste into their mouths and tried not to think about it too hard. The tubes were heavy, they were unappetizing, and the men hated them. NASA quietly retired them because a meal you cannot see or smell is barely a meal at all. But for a few brief missions, the toughest test pilots in America were eating creamed meat out of a squeeze tube and calling it lunch. Number 23. Bite-sized cubes you rehydrated with your own spit. Here is one that sounds made up. The early cubes, compressed little blocks of dehydrated food, were designed to be rehydrated inside the astronaut's own mouth using nothing but saliva. You popped a dry cube in, held it, and let your own spit slowly turn it into something chewable. Scott Carpenter ate one of the first solid foods in space in 1962, and the cubes were the alternative to the dreaded tubes. The problem was crumbs. In zero gravity, a stray crumb does not fall to the floor. It floats. It drifts into an eye, an air vent, a switch. So the cubes were a constant balance between feeding a man and endangering his spacecraft. The taste was chalky, the texture was strange, and the act of gumming a dry block into paste with your own mouth was about as far from a home-cooked dinner as a human being can get. And yet men flew to the edge of space, eating exactly this. Number 22. Sugar cookie cubes made by hand in a NASA lab. Not everything was grim. There was one woman who quietly made the food better, and her name was Rita Rapp. She ran the Apollo food team, and she worked so closely with the astronauts that she learned their individual likes and dislikes by heart. Her sugar cookie cubes became a genuine crew favorite. Little bite-sized blocks of sweet cookie you ate dry. No water needed, engineered small so they would not throw crumbs. These were not mass-produced in some factory. They came out of a NASA food lab, made to a careful recipe, packed in 4-ply laminated film to lock out moisture and oxygen. When Apollo 11 landed on the moon, sugar cookie cubes were in the meal pack. Think about that. The most advanced machine humanity had ever built carried a homemade cookie to another world. In a diet of freeze-dried entrees and salty paste, that small sweetness was a piece of Earth the astronauts could hold on to. Number 21. Strawberry cereal cubes. Breakfast in space had its own strange inventions, and the strawberry cereal cube was one of the odder ones. Imagine your breakfast cereal, the milk, the strawberries, all of it compressed and dried into a solid little brick you could eat with your fingers. On Apollo 7, the very first crewed Apollo flight, strawberry cereal cubes showed up on the breakfast menu right alongside the bacon. The idea was clever. Cereal is impossible in zero gravity because the flakes scatter and the milk balls up into floating spheres. So the engineers solved it by turning the whole bowl into a cube. But strawberry in particular became a famous failure. Astronauts and food scientists later admitted the strawberry cube was one of the low points of the whole program, a dry, oddly flavored block that never quite tasted like the fruit it was named after. It was a brilliant piece of engineering and a genuinely disappointing breakfast, all at the same time. Number 20. Bacon squares. Now, here is the one the astronauts actually loved. Bacon squares were dried, chopped bacon pressed into little cubes roughly an inch on each side, and for years they were the single most beloved food in the American space program. They debuted during the Gemini missions and became a breakfast staple on nearly every Apollo flight. On Apollo 8, the first mission to orbit the moon, Jim Lovell was so happy with his breakfast that he summed up the entire crew's mood in one line about bacon squares being happiness itself. The men raved about them, and there was a hidden reason they worked so well. In zero gravity, sinuses cannot drain. So astronauts constantly felt congested, like they had a permanent head cold, which flattened their sense of taste. The salty, fatty punch of bacon cut right through that fog. It was one of the only foods that still tasted like something up there. That is why a dried cube of bacon became the comfort food of the moon race. Number 19. Cinnamon toasted bread cubes. You cannot bring a loaf of bread into a spacecraft. The crumbs alone would be a disaster, drifting into every crevice and every instrument. So NASA did the only thing it could. It turned toast into a cube. Cinnamon toasted bread cubes were exactly what they sound like. Little squares of toasted cinnamon-flavored bread, coated in a thin, protective film so they would hold together and not shed crumbs. They appeared at breakfast after breakfast throughout the early Apollo flights, the closest thing to a warm slice of morning toast that physics would allow. The film coating was the secret. That 4-ply laminate did double duty, protecting the flavor and locking the crumbs in place. Astronauts ate them dry, and for men who missed the simple pleasure of breakfast at a kitchen table, a cinnamon cube was a tiny, engineered echo of home. It was toast, reduced to its most portable, most spacecraft-safe possible form. Number 18. Tang. Everybody thinks NASA invented Tang. NASA did not invent Tang. General Foods put that orange powder on grocery shelves before a single astronaut ever tasted it. But here is the strange truth: the space program does not always advertise. Tang was not on board to be a treat. It was there to fix a problem. Apollo spacecraft made their own drinking water as a byproduct of the fuel cells that generated electricity, and that water often tasted terrible, sometimes tainted with the byproducts of the chemical reaction. Straight from the tap, it was hard to drink, so the astronauts dumped orange powder into it to mask the flavor. Tang was flying to the moon as a cover-up for bad water. General Foods, of course, seized on the connection and ran an advertising blitz, and a generation of kids begged for the drink of astronauts. The reality was less glamorous. The men of Apollo were drinking artificially flavored orange powder to choke down water that tasted like a battery. Number 17. Shrimp cocktail. Of everything on this list, the shrimp cocktail is the one that comes closest to a genuinely good meal, and it became one of the most requested foods of the entire era. Buzz Aldrin, the second man to walk on the moon, adored it. The freeze-dried shrimp came in tiny whole pieces, and the astronauts would inject water into the pouch, knead it, and wait for the little shrimp to plump back to life, then eat them with a spicy, horseradish-forward cocktail sauce. That sauce was the whole point. Remember, most space food was deliberately under-seasoned to avoid upsetting the gut in zero gravity, so everything tasted muted and flat. The shrimp cocktail broke that rule. The sharp bite of the horseradish blasted straight through the congestion and the blandness, and actually registered on the tongue. Astronauts across the program listed it as a favorite for exactly that reason. In a diet designed to be gentle and boring, the shrimp cocktail was a small, welcome shock of real flavor. Number 16. Freeze-dried entrees brought back to life with hot water. This was the single biggest leap in space dining, and it happened on Apollo. Earlier missions only had cold water to rehydrate their food, which meant every freeze-dried meal came out lukewarm at best, a clammy, tepid version of whatever it was supposed to be. Apollo changed that. The improved fuel cells produced water clean enough and, crucially, hot enough to actually reconstitute a meal properly. Suddenly, the astronauts could eat chicken and rice, beef stew, or spaghetti that was warm and something like real. They would inject the hot water through a valve, knead the pouch, snip it open, and eat with a spoon. One pouch of freeze-dried chicken and rice from Apollo 11 even survived the trip and came home, and it sits in a museum today. It sounds ordinary now, a warm bowl of chicken and rice. But being able to serve a hot meal 250,000 miles from Earth was a genuine turning point in how humans survive in space. First pattern break. Here is where the story gets stranger than any single food. Every meal on this list had to solve a problem that has nothing to do with taste, and everything to do with the fact that in zero gravity, food tries to kill you. A single crumb the size of a grain of rice is not a nuisance up there. It is a floating projectile that can drift behind a control panel and short out a circuit, or slip into an astronaut's eye, or get inhaled into a lung with nobody around to help. This is why NASA hired the Pillsbury Company back in 1959, the same Pillsbury that made your dinner rolls, and set them to work engineering food that would not crumble and would not grow a single microbe. The astronauts were not just eating. They were living inside a sealed machine that one bad crumb could cripple. Every cube, every coating, every laminated pouch on this list was a small act of survival engineering disguised as a snack. Number 15. Freeze-dried ice cream. This is the one every gift shop sells, that chalky brick in the shiny silver wrapper. And here is the twist. It barely ever actually flew. NASA did send freeze-dried ice cream up on Apollo 7 in cube form, so it is real. It did happen, at least once. But the astronauts were not impressed. The stuff that sits in museum gift shops today, that dry, foam-textured bar that dissolves oddly on your tongue, does not taste much like ice cream. And it crumbles badly, which, as we now know, is the one thing space food absolutely cannot do. So the famous astronaut ice cream of legend was very nearly a myth. It got made, it got flown once, and then it quietly vanished from the menus because it was crumbly and disappointing. The real space treats were things like butterscotch pudding, but the freeze-dried ice cream became the icon anyway. A piece of Apollo mythology built around a food the astronauts themselves mostly passed on. Number 14. Pineapple fruitcake. Fruitcake gets mocked on Earth as the gift nobody wants. the brick that gets re-gifted every December. In space, it was a small miracle. Pineapple fruitcake was dense, moist, packed with sugar and calories, and it held together beautifully without shedding crumbs, which made it nearly perfect for spaceflight. As Apollo 8 swung around the far side of the moon on Christmas Eve 1968, the first crew ever to orbit another world, they had fruitcake on the menu, a strange little holiday touch 250,000 miles from home. The very quality that makes fruitcake a punchline on Earth, its heavy, compact, almost indestructible nature, is exactly what made it ideal for the moon. It did not fall apart. It did not spoil. It delivered a serious hit of energy in a tiny package. The joke of the Christmas dinner table turned out to be one of the smartest foods NASA could pack. Sometimes the thing everyone laughs at is the thing that works. Number 13. The spoon bowl and the pudding that clung to the spoon. For years, the whole idea of eating with a spoon in space was impossible. Scoop up a spoonful of anything, and it would simply float off the spoon and drift away. Then, Apollo introduced the spoon bowl, and it changed everything through one clever trick of physics. The bowl was a zip-closure plastic pouch. You rehydrated the food inside until it was wet and slightly sticky, then unzipped the top and ate with a spoon. And here is the strange part. Surface tension held the food onto the spoon. As long as the food was moist enough, it clung to the metal instead of floating away, letting an astronaut eat chocolate or butterscotch pudding almost like a person sitting at a normal table. It sounds trivial. It was a genuine breakthrough. For the first time, men in space could eat a meal the way humans have eaten for thousands of years, with a spoon and a bowl held together by nothing but the quiet grip of surface tension. Number 12. Coffee that came out lukewarm. Coffee flew to the moon, but forget any image of a hot, steaming mug. Space coffee came as a powder in a pouch, and even on Apollo, with its improved water system, the temperature was inconsistent and often just tepid. You injected the water, kneaded the bag, and drank warmish, slightly flat coffee through the opening. There was no cup to wrap your hands around, no aroma rising off the surface, no ritual, just a plastic pouch of brownish liquid that never quite reached the temperature a coffee drinker back home would tolerate. And yet the astronauts drank it, because coffee is coffee. And a warm, caffeinated drink was one more small tether to a normal morning on Earth. It made the first moon meal list, sharing the menu with bacon and peaches, the most powerful spacecraft ever flown. And the crew was sipping lukewarm coffee from a bag, missing the simple pleasure of a hot cup more than almost anything else. Number 11. Peaches. Something as humble as canned peaches deserves a place on this list because peaches were everywhere in the Apollo diet, and they were quietly one of the most reliable pleasures the astronauts had. When Armstrong and Aldrin ate the first scheduled meal on the surface of the moon, peaches were on the tray, right alongside the bacon squares and the sugar cookie cubes. There was a practical reason peaches showed up so often. They were sweet, they were soft, they delivered moisture and quick energy, and they were about as far from the salty, muted flavor of most space food as you could get. In a menu full of engineering compromises and freeze-dried oddities, a serving of peaches was almost startlingly normal, a taste of an ordinary summer afternoon on Earth. So when you picture the first men eating on the moon, do not just picture the exotic stuff. Picture peaches, the same kind that sat in your grandmother's pantry, opened and eaten on the Sea of Tranquility. Number 10. Canadian bacon and applesauce. Here is a pairing that sounds like it wandered off a 1960s diner menu and somehow ended up on a spacecraft. Canadian bacon and applesauce was a recurring breakfast throughout the Apollo program. The round slices of ham packed together with sweet applesauce in a single serving. It was comfort food. Plain and simple, the kind of hearty morning plate an American family might have eaten before church on a Sunday. And that was precisely the point. Rita Rapp and her team, understood that a crew flying to the moon needed more than calories. They needed morale, a reason to look forward to a meal, a flavor that reminded them of home. Canadian bacon and applesauce was stocked in the snack pantry, so the astronauts could grab it whenever they wanted a familiar bite without digging out a full meal pack. It was ordinary on Earth and extraordinary in orbit, a small, salty, sweet piece of the world they had left behind, riding along to another planet. Number 9. Sausage patties. When the astronauts wanted a change from bacon, they reached for the sausage patty, a freeze-dried disc of seasoned pork that showed up as a breakfast alternative across the missions. On Apollo 11, each crew member had the option to swap out their bacon squares for a sausage patty on at least one morning, a tiny bit of menu freedom in a diet that was otherwise locked in weeks before launch. The patty had the same job as the bacon, to deliver protein and, more importantly, real flavor to men whose congested sinuses had dulled their sense of taste. Sausage, heavily seasoned and salty, could still punch through. And it points to something remarkable about the whole operation. The food team had figured out how to freeze-dry a breakfast sausage, ship it to the moon, bring it back to life with a squirt of hot water, and serve it warm to a man in orbit. A humble sausage patty, engineered into a spacecraft-safe meal, hurtling through the vacuum toward the lunar surface. Number 8. Potassium-enriched orange drink. This is the one that got cursed on live radio. During the later Apollo missions, doctors grew worried about the astronauts' hearts. The intense physical work on the moon, combined with fluid loss, could throw off their electrolytes and trigger dangerous irregular heart rhythms. The fix was to load their drinks with potassium, including a special potassium-enriched orange drink. The problem was that it tasted awful, and John Young, on Apollo 16, made his feelings extremely clear. Standing on the surface of the moon, he complained bitterly about the citrus drink giving him gas, griping that he had not eaten this much citrus in 20 years. What Young did not realize was that his microphone was open. Every word went straight to mission control and out to the listening world. His unfiltered review of NASA's heart-healthy orange drink, broadcast from the moon, became one of the more famously human moments of the program. The medicine was keeping his heart safe. It just tasted so bad he cursed it on another world with the microphone hot. Number 7. Thermostabilized wet packs. Apollo introduced a food that finally started to resemble an actual dinner, and it was called the wet pack. A thermostabilized wet pack was a foil pouch of food, like beef and gravy or ham salad, that had been heat-treated to kill microbes and sealed with its moisture intact, so it did not need any rehydrating at all. You just opened it and ate. This was a genuine luxury in the world of space food. No injecting water, no kneading the bag, no waiting for a freeze-dried brick to come back to life. The food was already moist, already ready, closer to a canned stew you might eat on a camping trip than anything the Mercury astronauts had endured. Beef and gravy in a wet pack was on the Apollo 11 menu, one of the meals that helped the first moon crew eat something like real food during the most important mission in history. The wet pack was the ancestor of the pouch meals soldiers and campers eat today, and it made its debut on the way to the moon. Second pattern break. Here is something worth sitting with. The men eating this food were not just picky diners with limited options. They were often barely eating at all. Space does strange things to appetite, and across these early missions, astronauts consistently ate far less than the roughly 2,800 calories a day the menus were designed to provide. Part of it was the food. Part of it was that in zero gravity, with a congested head and a churning stomach, hunger simply did not show up the way it does on Earth. And part of it was darker and more practical. The early spacecraft had no proper toilet, so some astronauts deliberately ate as little as possible to avoid the miserable ordeal of going to the bathroom in a capsule the size of a small car. Think about what that means. NASA spent millions engineering the perfect crumb-free, microbe-free, nutritionally balanced space meal, and the men it was made for were quietly skipping it, choosing hunger over the alternative. Number 6. Apricot food bars tucked inside the helmet. By the later Apollo missions, the astronauts were spending hours at a time outside on the lunar surface, and a man doing heavy physical labor in a bulky suit gets hungry and thirsty. But you cannot exactly stop for lunch in a vacuum. So NASA came up with one of the strangest feeding solutions of the entire program. They fitted a chewy fruit bar, like the apricot food bar on Apollo 15, into a socket inside the astronaut's helmet, positioned so he could lean his head over and take a bite without using his hands. Picture it. A man is walking on the moon, sealed inside a pressurized suit, and when he gets hungry, he turns his head and gnaws on a fruit bar mounted next to his face. There was a water straw in there too, added on later missions so the men could drink while they worked. These little in-helmet snack bars, which came in flavors like chocolate and peanut butter, were the direct ancestor of the energy bars sold in every gas station today. Number 5. Salmon salad and tuna salad. Fish, of all things, made it to the moon. Salmon salad and tuna salad were both on the Apollo menus, freeze-dried and rehydrated into something resembling the deli salad you might spread on a sandwich back home. It sounds unlikely, and even a little risky, fish in a sealed spacecraft, but the food scientists had learned to freeze-dry almost anything, and the astronauts wanted variety. Weeks of bacon, pudding, and chicken and rice wears thin, and a savory, protein-rich fish salad broke the monotony. There was a small poetry to it, too. Salmon and tuna are foods pulled from the deep ocean, the last great frontier humans had explored before they turned their eyes upward. And here they were, dried and packed and carried across the void to the surface of another world. From the bottom of the sea to the top of the sky in a laminated pouch, brought back to life with a squirt of water and eaten with a spoon in orbit around the moon. Number 4. The Apollo 8 Christmas Dinner. On Christmas Eve 1968, 3 men became the first humans to leave Earth's gravity and orbit the moon. And Rita Rapp made sure they would not spend the holiday choking down cubes and paste. She and her team slipped a special surprise into the food locker, a proper Christmas dinner in the new wet pack format, including turkey and gravy the men could eat with a spoon instead of the usual dried fare. The crew was genuinely delighted. Here they were, farther from home than any human had ever been, staring at the cratered surface of the moon sliding past their window. And they got to eat something that actually tasted like a holiday meal. It was a small, deliberate act of kindness, engineered into the mission. Someone on the ground thinking about the hearts of 3 men in a metal can 250,000 miles away. The turkey dinner in orbit around the moon on Christmas Eve is one of the warmest, most human footnotes in the whole race to get there. Number 3. The contingency feeding system. This one is pure survival, and it is genuinely unsettling. When NASA planned Apollo, they had to prepare for a nightmare scenario. What if the cabin lost pressure and the astronauts had to survive inside their sealed spacesuits, unable to open a helmet for an extended time? A man cannot eat a bite of solid food through a closed helmet. He could starve inside a functioning spacecraft. So they built the contingency feeding system, carried on Apollo 11 and beyond. It was a way to feed an astronaut liquid food through a small port in his helmet, a tube of nutrition he could draw on without ever breaking the seal that was keeping him alive. It was never used, thankfully, but it was there on the first moon landing, a just-in-case tube of survival food designed for the worst day imaginable. Every triumphant image of Apollo 11 you have ever seen was shadowed by that quiet contingency, a liquid meal waiting in case the men had to live sealed in their suits. Third pattern break. Step back and look at the arc of this whole thing. In the span of a single decade, human food in space went from gray meat paste sucked out of a metal tube to a turkey dinner eaten with a spoon in orbit around the moon. That is not just a story about recipes. It is a story about a country learning, in real time, how to keep human beings alive and sane in a place that was never meant to hold them. Behind every one of these foods was a small army of scientists at Pillsbury, at the Army's Natick Labs, at Whirlpool, and a food team at NASA led by a woman named Rita Rapp, who learned each astronaut's favorite meal by heart. They were not just solving the problem of hunger. They were solving the problem of morale, of homesickness, of the crushing strangeness of being the first people ever to eat somewhere no one had eaten before. Which brings us to number 2, and to number 1, the 2 strangest meals of all. Number 2, the contraband corned beef sandwich. In March 1965, on Gemini 3, the very first flight to carry 2 American astronauts, a corned beef sandwich flew into orbit without permission, and it nearly caused a scandal that reached Congress. Here is how it happened. Astronaut Wally Schirra, a famous prankster, walked into Wolfie's, a deli in Cocoa Beach, Florida, and bought a corned beef sandwich on rye. He handed it to John Young, who tucked it into a pocket of his spacesuit and smuggled it aboard. About 2 hours into the flight, Young pulled it out and offered it to his commander, Gus Grissom, who happened to love corned beef. Grissom took a bite, and immediately the rye bread began breaking apart into a cloud of floating crumbs. Exactly the danger NASA had spent millions trying to prevent. Grissom stuffed it back into his pocket. The whole exchange lasted maybe 30 seconds. But back on Earth, the House Appropriations Committee actually convened over it, furious that the men had ignored the official space food they were supposed to be testing. A replica of that sandwich, preserved in resin, sits in a museum in Indiana to this day. Number 1, bread and wine on the Sea of Tranquility. The strangest food ever carried to the moon was never on any NASA menu, and it became the first thing ever eaten on the surface of another world. Buzz Aldrin was an elder at a Presbyterian church in Texas, and before Apollo 11 launched, he got quiet permission to bring a tiny communion kit in his personal preference pouch, a thumb-sized plastic vial of wine, a small wafer of bread, and a miniature silver chalice barely bigger than a thimble. After the Eagle landed, in the pause before the world watched Armstrong step down, Aldrin opened those little packets in radio silence. He poured the wine into the cup, and in the 1/6 gravity of the moon, he watched it curl slowly and gracefully up the side of the chalice, moving in a way no liquid had ever moved before human eyes. Then he ate the bread and drank the wine. NASA, tangled in a lawsuit over the Apollo 8 crew reading Genesis, had asked him to keep it private, so he did it alone and unheard. The first food and the first drink ever consumed on the moon were a sip of wine and a bite of bread, taken in silence, in the name of one man's quiet gratitude. Here is my challenge. The next time you eat a corned beef sandwich, or open a can of peaches, or drink a lukewarm cup of coffee, think about the men who ate those exact things 250,000 miles from home, floating in a metal can, homesick for a normal meal at a normal table. These were not just space rations. They were pieces of Earth, carried into the dark so a handful of people would still feel human out there. Drop a comment and tell me which one surprised you most. I want to know if the smuggled sandwich gets more love than the bread and wine on the moon. Because these were not just strange foods. They were the taste of the bravest thing our species has ever done.